Donald Trump's focus on Venezuela is often talked about in headlines as if it is purely political, but at the heart of it is one central factor: oil. Venezuela is not just an ordinary oil-producing country. It has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, estimated at over 300 billion barrels. That surpasses even Saudi Arabia and Russia. Most of this oil is heavy crude, a type of oil that U.S. refineries specialize in processing but increasingly struggle to source from other countries. Heavy crude is more difficult to refine, so countries that control it can hold significant influence over global energy markets. This makes Venezuela an extremely strategic country for any administration that wants to ensure long-term energy security and maintain leverage in the global economy. Access to Venezuelan oil would bring several important benefits to the United States. First, it could increase the overall oil supply, which may help stabilize or lower fuel prices in the U.S. market. Americans have experienced rising gas prices in recent years, and securing a stable supply of oil could reduce fluctuations caused by instability elsewhere in the world. Second, Venezuelan oil provides the type of crude that U.S. refineries are specifically designed to process. Many refineries cannot easily switch between types of crude, which means that Venezuela's heavy crude is particularly valuable. Third, opening up access to Venezuela's oil creates billions of dollars in potential investment opportunities for American energy companies, especially in rebuilding Venezuela's damaged and outdated infrastructure. Venezuela's oil production has fallen dramatically over the past decade due to mismanagement, corruption, and U.S. sanctions. Once one of the world's top oil producers, the country now produces only a fraction of what it did in its peak years. This collapse has caused severe economic hardship for Venezuelans and made the country dependent on foreign alliances and loans. For Trump, encouraging U.S. companies to invest in Venezuela represents both a business opportunity and a way to influence the country's future. The argument is that if U.S. companies help rebuild oil production, it could benefit the Venezuelan people while also serving American interests. But oil is not just an economic resource, it is also a geopolitical tool. Venezuela has historically built alliances with countries such as China, Russia, and Cuba, and oil exports have been central to funding these partnerships. By exerting influence over Venezuelan oil, the U.S. can limit the resources available to rivals, strengthen its own position in Latin America, and apply pressure on the Maduro government to comply with U.S. demands. Trump and his administration have frequently framed this as reclaiming stolen oil, arguing that Venezuela's resources should benefit its people rather than foreign allies of the government. The U.S. approach to Venezuelan oil is also tied to a broader political and strategic narrative. At home, Trump positions himself as a defender of American energy independence and economic interests. Securing Venezuela's oil sends a message that the United States is willing to take action to maintain energy security. Abroad, the strategy demonstrates strength and influence, showing that the U.S. is prepared to intervene when strategic resources are at stake. Even the sanctions imposed on Venezuela in recent years have often targeted oil exports directly, signaling that energy is a central lever in U.S. policy rather than a secondary concern. Critics argue that Trump's interest in Venezuelan oil is motivated more by profit than humanitarian concerns. Large American oil companies stand to gain billions of dollars if production increases, while ordinary Venezuelans may see little benefit if the revenue is redirected or controlled externally. There are also risks of confrontation with other countries that have investments in Venezuela, particularly Russia and China, who have long supported the country's energy sector. Despite official statements emphasizing support for the Venezuelan people or a fight against corruption, it is clear that oil remains the central motivation in these policies. It is also important to understand why heavy crude oil is so valuable. Unlike lighter crude, which is more common and easier to refine, heavy crude requires specialized refineries. U.S. refineries that can process this type of oil are limited, which means that Venezuela's reserves are particularly valuable. Having access to this oil allows the United States to be less dependent on other oil-producing countries, strengthens national energy security, and provides a buffer against global supply disruptions caused by political instability in other regions. Geopolitics plays an even larger role. Venezuela's oil has historically given the country influence in Latin America and the wider world. By controlling access to these resources, the U.S. can shift the balance of power in the region, limit funding for countries or groups that oppose U.S. interests, and use oil as a tool of diplomacy. Every barrel under U.S. influence becomes a potential lever to negotiate, reward, or punish. This makes oil far more than just a commodity. It becomes an instrument of national power. Trump's approach reflects a broader pattern in U.S. foreign policy, combining economic interests with political strategy. Access to Venezuelan oil is not only about selling fuel or making profits, it is about ensuring that the United States maintains leverage over global energy markets, over regional politics, and over rival powers. Oil here is both a commodity and a weapon, and recognizing that is key to understanding why Venezuela is such a central focus for Trump and his administration. In conclusion, Donald Trump's interest in Venezuela can be understood as a combination of economic opportunity, geopolitical influence, and strategic control. Access to massive energy reserves, potential benefits for U.S. companies and consumers, increased influence in Latin America, and a way to limit rivals' power all make Venezuelan oil a central focus of U.S. policy. Oil is more than just fuel. It is a tool of power, influence, and strategy, and that explains why Venezuela remains at the heart of U.S. attention under Trump.